Howdy, folks. Told you I'd make it back. This is Bob Gums bringing you the Concern Forum. And wow, what a week we've had so far. Now, I understand Big Orange. Oh man, these names that we come up with. Well, yeah, Trump is supposed to turn himself in tonight. As I speak to you now, this is Thursday evening. Oh, approximately 6:30. 6:45. I'm curious to see if he's going to do it. Now, naturally, he has to try and do it his way, okay, which is a lot of crap, to be quite frank about it. But he has, I think, 19 other miscreants that also have to turn themselves in. Now, the big ones, right? That creep Giuliani and a few of the other ones. I think the crazy lady, one of the crazy lady lawyers is there. They already got their booking pictures. You know, that photo they take when you're getting booked? They've already got that. I'm quite sure that Trump is probably waiting, say, yeah, goody, goody. As soon as they take my mugshot, I can send it out to my silly minions, out there in the hinterland. They'll love it. But no, I tell you, quite frankly, some of us have gifts for certain things. I'm not saying that I have a gift, but I will tell you this, and I believe I have the tapes to prove it. I was telling everyone who would bother to listen, and this was in 2015, and I said that if Trump runs against Hillary, he will win. Now, I was only half right there because he didn't win. Hillary won the popular vote. As a matter of fact, she beat him by about 4 or 5 million votes. Problem is that America is still kind of afraid to be a true democracy. And because of that, we have this silly thing that basically is part of our slave heritage here in America, called the Electoral College. That, and of course, you know that as black men, because that's exactly who it was meant for, because at that time, women were not allowed to vote. So they decided to count all black men who were enslaved as 3/5. No, I'm wrong. They counted the black men in the state, slave or free, and they were counted as 3/5 of a white person. Okay, that's called the 3/5 compromise. And the reason for that is because when I say they, I'm talking about the folks in Philadelphia who were, setting up the Constitution. Basically, they weren't cool with that. Well, see, they were constantly afraid of South Carolina because where South Carolina went, the Deep South would follow. And South Carolina, that's their favorite tactic. Well, if we can't have our way, we're going to break up the Union. And so that's what South Carolina did. See, they wanted the opportunity to, and the reason, folks, by the way, while we're on the subject, I don't mean to make it seem like I'm jumping from, Trump to Giuliani to the Ukraine, but a lot of this stuff deals with history. And Americans have a very difficult time over the last 30 years when it comes to having. I'm not talking about being a professor or a scholar in American history, but I'm just talking about basic American history, basic constitutional history, why things work the way they do. And believe me, you're out there in the middle of the night driving down the street and you get caught, excuse me, you get stopped by some cops and you are very dubious that these guys have any real reason to stop you and try to interrogate you. Trust me, maybe a little of the knowledge that you just might have happened to pick up listening to my program or some other program uh, might give you just enough knowledge to keep your butt out of jail for a weekend. Seriously. Because a lot of times people, um, just because they're wearing a uniform or because they, quote unquote, working for the government, working for the public, uh, doesn't mean that they're always righteous. Okay? And a lot of times when they see that you don't know a damn thing, that's when they take full advantage of you. Right? I mean, that's the reason why so many, especially in the black and brown community, that's why so many young brothers wind up behind bars a lot of times. Not because they're guilty, but because they did not know how to express themselves or to explain their action in an intelligent and forthright manner. See? I'm not saying that you have to be aggressive or rude, but you do have to be strong. You have to stand strong. And you have to know your rights. And you have to know why why A is equal to B, which will be equal to C. And if you don't know that, well, you might find yourself in a world of hurt. But getting back to what I was saying, yes, this country that was supposedly founded on the idea that all men are created equal. I mean, that's what it says in the book, right? But in order to keep the union together, they bent to the will of South Carolina and hence all the rest of the southern states. See, the South, they didn't have people in their mind, because remember, I'm black. So I'm not really a full people, but I am a person, if you get my meaning. And so what they said was, well, places like Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut, they have, a good amount of white citizens, white male citizens. But here down south, we don't have as many white male citizens as you do in Massachusetts or in Pennsylvania. But we do have a lot of black slaves. Some free people, but mostly slaves. So what we want to do to give us a leg up, we want you to count our black people as 3/5. Every black male will be counted as 3/5 of a white person. That way, it will help to balance out the whole representative thing. And do you know that for, oh my God, 60 some odd years, that basically put the South over the North. And they essentially the South essentially ran this country, okay, for the longest. They had the money, they had the power, right, working power because they had the slaves, right? Their crops were picked, their cotton was picked, and I believe it was the American South where you first really see the whole idea of millionaires here in the United States. But that changed as the world, especially the Western world, became more and more industrialized, right? The Midwest, upper Midwest, and the North, Northeast, they were like, hey, man, wait a minute. We're starting to have factories and, railroads and so on and so forth. Why do we have to take a bunch of crap off a bunch of ignorant yokels? I mean, that was the general idea. And to a large extent, that's how both sides saw each other, right? The South saw the North as a bunch of scheming Yankees, always worrying about the dollar. And the Northerners felt, to a large extent, well, the South is just full of lazy white people who have poor Sambo out there in a hot Georgia sun picking his cotton. And then he wants to brag about the wealth. Well, that's the wealth that somebody else basically accrued for him. So that's basically what helped lead up to the Civil War. Oh, answer a question you might be thinking, was the Civil War about slavery? Basically speaking, yes. Okay? Now, you don't have to take my word for it. There's this guy, what's his name? Alexander Stephens? Or Stephen Alexander. I always get that mixed up. He was the first and only vice president of the Confederacy. And when they wrote their succession, in other words, when they were leaving the Union, he wrote down the whole thing. Why are we Southerners? Why we are leaving? And it's right there in black and white. He says, we're leaving because we believe in slavery. We think it's a great thing. And the North doesn't like it, so screw them. We're out of here. And that's basically what it was all about. And to a large extent, it's still about. Now, when you hear people say, oh, well, it wasn't about slavery. It was about states' rights. Okay. Yeah, Bob, it was about states' rights. It was about the right of the states to choose their own destiny. Okay. Well, Jimmy Lee, talk about destiny. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, the states felt that they wanted to live a certain way, that was their right. And there were no Yankees that had any right coming down south telling them what to do. Okay. So I say, do what? Tell them what not to do. Slavery. So, yes, there was some extenuating circumstances, but overall, the whole damn thing was about slavery. Now, was the war fought to free the slaves? Originally, when people who want to put down Lincoln, you hear them tell it, well, it was all a lie. It wasn't about freeing no damn slaves. Okay, just to get it straight, you had a guy, Abe Lincoln, didn't believe in slavery, thought it was poison to a democracy, which I happen to agree with. But was the war started to free slaves? No. It started when South Carolina decided to fire upon the federal fort in the harbor called Fort Sumter, okay? And Lincoln said, no, we're going to keep the Union together. Boom. That's what started the war. However, as we get into 1862, when did that happen, by the way? That happened in 1861. However, as we get almost to the end of 1862, it was looking pretty bad for the North to a large extent. Uh, a series of defeats, mainly because of politics within the Union Army, and it was looking bad. And Lincoln said to himself, "Well, I'm going to have to do something. We got to do something, right? We got to pull the last card out the deck." And that was the emancipation of the slaves. So, starting January 1863, all the states that were still in rebellion, uh, their slaves were declared free. And that's when the Civil War became a fight for freedom. And that's when you start seeing large amounts of black men signing up for the Army. The Navy, yeah, the Navy also. I'll tell you something interesting. You always had blacks in the Navy. That was nothing new. You had black naval heroes from the Revolutionary War. The Army, well, they stopped having blacks in the military after the War of 1812. But before that, you always had black men in the Army. It's something very strange about this country. They asked the question in 1862, will black men fight? Right? This is 1862 now. Now, Frederick Douglass, that noted black author and abolitionist, he had a good answer for them. Because he said, well, wait a minute, man, we're at 1862. What about all the blacks that fought under George Washington in 1776, 1777, all the way through the Revolutionary War? Do you know that American fortunes had gone so low in the Revolutionary War that there was a time that of all the blacks who were fighting for the revolutionaries, for the Americans, if they had all decided, oh, the hell with it, we're getting out of here. We're out of here later. If they had done that, there would be no United States today. We'd be something like like Canada. But yet, you have people that were uninformed and or ignorant enough to ask a very dumb question, will black men fight? In 1862, they're asking that question. And they had already proved their gumption 70 years earlier in the Revolutionary War. And then, here we go again, 1898, all through the Indian Wars, the late 1860s, the 1870s, the 1880s, going into the 1890s. You know, like when you looked at them cowboy movies when you was a kid, and they're blowing the charge. Well, in reality, most of the time, when the cavalry was riding to the rescue, they were black men riding to the rescue. 9th and 10th Colored Cav, 24th and 25th Black Infantry, the Buffalo Soldiers. You see, this is part of the problem that we're facing now, okay? This race thing. And America's problem dealing with people of color. Now, I'm not just talking about black folks either, okay? I'm talking about anybody that's different. How many of you know about the Filipino Wars? The United States fought something like about a 3.5, 4-year war against the people of the Philippines. because the Filipinos wanted their independence, and the United States didn't want to give it to them. You know, because Americans thinking, well, hell, we chased the Spanish out for them, so hell, we're entitled to keep the islands. Yeah. But see, this is what happens when you don't know history, when you don't know your history, and then when you have these crazy mother organizations. They're just fascists, by the way, with this business about parents taking over the curriculum of their kids in school. That's utter nonsense. Okay. Yeah, I can see some soccer mom trying to teach her kids physics, right? Or the basics of algebra. Now, don't get me wrong. You have some parents out there that are more than capable of teaching their kids highly complex and complicated subject matter. But see, that's not generally the case, right? These little people that you call your children, you want them to be able to handle the world that they are going to grow up in. See, that's something a lot of parents, they miss that. They don't get that. You're not raising your kids for your world, okay? You are the grown adult. And by the time you start having kids, you are supposed to, I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but you are supposed to have the basic rudiments of at least a decent high school education, which is really a joke. Because if you don't have a college degree and you don't have some type of, mind you now, I said high school degree or some type of technical education, you're lost in the sauce, boys. Seriously. A lot of these parents, they need to go back to school themselves. But see, it's this whole thing about race, because they're scared. Oh, I don't want Johnny to learn anything about slavery. When the hell, what gives you the right to pick and choose the knowledge that your children are going to receive? Because I'll be quite frank about it. I definitely don't want them in my country or in my world. Because if they're going to just have only the limited knowledge that you have, right? What's that going to do for them 30 years down the road? Seriously. A lot of it, I think, and that's this fascination with people like Trump and DeSantis. A lot of folks who feel that way, they're very confused. They see Russia, they see China, and they say, oh, well, China's doing this, China's doing that. I mean, my God, man. And now they're starting to hear noise from Africa, and the Africans are basically saying, hey, man, you give us the same respect you give each other. And I guess these things freak them out. Maybe because for so long they were taught that the whole world is stupid and Americans are the only ones that are smart. And white Americans at that. I don't know. But I do know that I think the business about school boards, I think we need to get rid of that. If you want to be in the school, then teach. If you don't know something and you have a question, then go to the school and ask. But this whole thing about parents, picking subject matter or canceling out subject matter, that's absolute nonsense. And I hope that we can get some kind of move in this country uh, so that universities, for example, Harvard should not be taking people from Florida because they don't know enough. And if they want to go to Harvard, then they should have to take some kind of remedial courses outside of Florida. You know, it's ironic. During the campaign, Biden made a crack. I mean, I guess that was his way of being half-assed funny. Okay, he said, talking to a group of black Americans, and he was saying, yeah, you know, you better make sure you vote Democrat. Don't let these Republicans get in there because they'll have you back in chains, or words to that effect. And do you know a lot of Republicans naturally, they got all winded and upset, right? Say, he is trying to have divisiveness and all. Listen, one of the things I do have against Joe Biden, and I'll be proud to vote for. I'll be quite happy to and proud to vote for Joe Biden. Well, excuse me. But one of the things I do disagree with him on is this whole thing about divisiveness and unity. These MAGA people, they don't want to be united, right? They do not want a united country, right? You think that what's his name, Tuberville, that ignoramus senator from, I think he's supposedly from Alabama, but he lives in Florida, Tuberville, whatever the hell. Used to be a football coach in Alabama. You think he's happy having to deal with this tall, big black guy who's the Secretary of Defense? You think he's happy with that? You think he's happy with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff being a black Air Force general? Of course not. And remember, this is the same senator that says that white nationalists are cool, cool Americans. How the hell are you going to be a good patriotic American if you're a white nationalist? Because that's saying that everybody else in the country ain't no damn good, basically. And that are not entitled to the same rights and benefits that white Americans have. But see, that's one of the problems I have with my Democrats. And I say my Democrats because I'm a registered Democrat. But we have given the impression that we don't like to fight. I mean, of course, you got like my girl AOC, my man, what is that, Raskin? The Jewish brother that has, he wears some cool headscarves because he was dealing with that cancer thing. I'm glad to see. It seems like he's gotten a lot better. Jamie Raskin, I think his name is. Cool, excellent people. And you got one or two others. But as a whole, especially coming out of New York, with the exception of AOC and my man up here up the road here in Yonkers, Bowman, he seems to, as we used to say in the Navy, like he has a pair. But in general, Democrats for too long, we have not stood up, see, and we need to get back into that mode. You know, if you want to drag the country backwards, okay, then try dragging us back to the 60s when we knew how to stand up. I've seen 3 presidents in my lifetime call on the power of the federal government to protect Americans in the exercise of their rights. 1 was Republican and 2 were Democrats. And I'm talking about Eisenhower, I'm talking about Jack Kennedy, and I'm talking about Lyndon Johnson. And damn it, if that's what we need to do, to get and maintain the rights of all Americans, then so be it. It's just that simple. I think the progressive left, we're not looking for a fight, but we're not afraid of one either. And I don't understand us. You know, we took out the greatest military machine in history, two at the same time, Japan and Germany. Fascism, militarism, and we took them on and won. And then, for good measure, we beat the Russians into space. So, what do we fear now? A Trump? Or DeSantis is just a little wannabe Hitler, but he's really a clown. I mean, we've seen that over and over. It's time for us to stand up. This business about abortion, for example. Look, the Republican Party, what they did, in order to curry favor, they felt that they needed to become more Nazi-like in their ideology. See, that's where the anti-people of color component comes in. Oh, and you black and Latino and Jewish people and one or two Asians, let me tell you something. We ain't dealing with Richard Nixon, right? Now, Nixon was a crumb, but he basically, he knew that he would only be able to go so far. That's why when he saw the handwriting on the wall, he resigned. See, Trump ain't that smart, and he is that arrogant. What the Republican Party did, and this was a bad mistake, they listened to people like that kid who's dead now, Lee Atwater, all right? And they started doing a hard turn to the right. And they kept turning, see? They forgot to come back to the central line, you know, the so-called mainstream. And it's a shame because the Republican Party, going into the 20th century, they had a few good ideas. I think Teddy Roosevelt, in his way, was a kind of a decent progressive guy. Unfortunately, he was further advanced than most white Americans on the subject of race during his time period. Unfortunately, when it counted, he wouldn't go far enough. Yes, he had first president to have dinner with a black man in the White House. But then again, I don't know. That's debatable between him and Lincoln. Okay. However, he betrayed the men of the 24th Colored Infantry, that race riot in Houston, Texas. Another reason why I don't care that much for Texas, their legacy. Just like Oklahoma, it's a bad one. Okay, but I don't know. It seems that after Teddy Roosevelt, the Republicans essentially lost touch with the average American. And then, of course, you know, you got the Depression, which most people blamed on the Republican Party, which they have a point with that one. But then after that, more and more the Republican Party found that the only time they could get a rise out of people is to basically scare them about stuff that wasn't even true. See, the McCarthy era, as they call it. for example. And basically, they've been using that same tactic. Unfortunately, each time they came back to that tactic. Uh, it got worse and worse. And what they decided to do basically was to open up their door for the lowest common denominator, for the most uneducated people, for the most bitter, hateful people. Uh, it became like it has become a rest home for the unconstructed Southerner, so to speak. That is what the modern Republican Party is today. What makes me kind of an expert on the Republican Party? Because I grew up in it. Yeah, you used to have, you had a lot of black folks back in the 50s, early 60s, he's Republican. It's like, okay, so what? It was no big thing. As a matter of fact, most of the black people in the projects I grew up in, those who were politically active, I would say at least half of them were registered Republicans. Now, of course, they started voting for Kennedy more and more, and the more Nixon left us, the more it seemed that the Republican Party was not a place for people of color. And it's not. I mean, it's cool, I guess, if you are a rich Asian American, like that. What's that guy? It was Venezuela. Don't even ask me to pronounce his name. I won't disrespect him in that fashion. But yeah, it's cool. Being Republican, it's a cool thing for him. But for the rest of us, that Republican base of 2023, well, that ain't the Republican base of 1963 or 73 or even 83, frankly. And I kind of laugh when I see the base or Republican politicians trying to appeal to the base. And they'll talk about, well, the Democrats, they want to punish Israel. And, there's this big gnashing of teeth and crocodile tears among Republicans about Israel, Here's my position on Israel. Too much stuff has gone on over there. Too many people have been displaced, right? Both Jewish and Christian and Muslim. Yeah, you have an active Christian community over there in the so-called Holy Land. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. And that has caused an immense amount of problems. It has caused problems for American Jews. Because American Jews, for the most part, they love Israel. And that is my feeling towards the matter as well. But by the same token, the right-wing governments that they've had over there in Israel, I can't go with that as an American. I cannot. I'm an American because I'm an American, right? Make any sense? In other words, I'm an American. If I go to Britain, I'm an American. If I go to Timbuktu, I'm an American. In other words, I still have the basic beliefs. All men are created equal. Nowadays, we say all people are created equal. Okay, people have the right to have their voice heard in the halls of government. That whole thing. that all people need to be treated equally and fairly. So no, I cannot go along with the Israeli government. Okay, but that doesn't. But as far as anti-Semitism, personally, I think that anti-Semites should be stripped, hung up by their balls. Quite frankly, that's my feeling. And I'm a very good student of the Third Reich, the rise and fall, and the Weimar Republic. Okay, and I've been fortunate enough to have had the pleasure and the education to have been to Israel on a couple of occasions. Thank you, U.S. Navy. Okay? So, if anybody called me an anti Semite, I don't know, I'd probably try to kick the living hell out of them. Because those people are anti Semites are about the most disgusting people that you ever want to be, come in contact with. All right? Why do I feel so strongly about that? Why do I hate people who are anti-Semitic? I'll tell you why. And believe me, I'm not as altruistic as somebody might get the impression of me. An old dude told me something a long time ago. Said, best way to protect yourself is to protect others. And I believe that. I am a black male. I am a black man. And when I say I am a black man, that takes in the full connotation of what that simple sentence, what those words mean. I remember I had a white friend when I was in the Navy, and the guy one time, he kind of embarrassed himself after he said it, but I, told him don't sweat it. But he was saying, damn, sometimes I wish I was black because y'all are so cool, And I looked at him, right? Young white cat. And I said, well, being black, it's kind of like being a member of a club that you have to pay extremely high membership dues. And see, when you're talking about people who are anti-Semitic, that's one of the easiest racist, religious hatreds that you can find, quite frankly. And I have found through experience that you scratch the surface of an anti-Semite, and you scratch enough, and you know what you're going to find? You're going to find an anti-black person, an anti-Hispanic person, an anti-indigenous American person. So, yeah, it's just like that idiot, what's his name, Kanye West. I mean, and his anti-Semitic rants. Let him go to Alabama or Mississippi. Places where that type of thing is, how should we say, more encouraged. Oh, we have problems up here in New York, don't get me wrong. But those red states, um, they're good at organizing hate. All right, they've had a lot of practice. And see that, here we are. It's one big circle. How are we going to deal with it? How are you going to bring to fruition a place that can maintain a decent quality of life that stands for some form of justice in the world? How are you going to maintain that type of place in a country? I mean, you started off on the wrong foot, okay? Everybody, I think it was Martin Luther King that really made the point. What about the indigenous people, the Native Americans, who European Americans mistakenly called Indians? No, they're indigenous people, indigenous Americans. These people had their land raped from them. And I will give the settlers, I'll give them 1 point, okay? The story, Manhattan, they bought the island for $24 worth of junk, basically, right? And the funny thing is, they got burned. The Dutch got burned because the indigenous folks that they gave the $24 to, they weren't from here. They were from Brooklyn. I tell you, them guys, them Brooklyn boys, see, even back then, But yeah, there was a tribe from Brooklyn. They had just come over to do a little hunting and fishing, and they took the $24 and they went back to Brooklyn. Hey, just like back in the day. Oh man, I mean, we got chased across the Brooklyn Bridge, but it's another story. But anyway, but yeah, this whole land, I do feel that some of these people who are so afraid of having real American history taught, they're just frightened and confused. And ignorant people are very easily frightened. They are very easily confused. And see, what people don't understand, ignorance. Well, all ignorance means is that you don't know something. Okay? Now, I'm ignorant to your, I don't know, sleep schedule or exercise schedule. I don't know your exercise schedule. So I'm ignorant of that particular thing. And see, what has been happening for so long, you have a country, they have a section of the country, and their whole thing is to keep America ignorant, right? Listen, your daddy fought the Nazis. Your daddy fought the Japanese at Guadalcanal, Okinawa. But now, the grandchild of that guy that took that beach at Normandy, he's being told, no, you can't read this because I'm afraid for you to read this. I mean, come on. We're Americans. And quite frankly, I think my whole thing is that, show what really happened, right? And look at that and say, well, damn, look how far we've come. And yes, we still have a ways to go. But look where we were as opposed to where we are now. Isn't that a good thing? Isn't that something to be proud of? See, that's the big problem with these women's groups. What is it that you try to hide from your kids? And we all know from personal experience that the worst thing that you do in the family is to try and hide secrets. Because as soon as, eventually, that crap comes out, all right? It really does, and not at the most opportune time. And that's no way to go through life or to try and guide the country. And these people, was it America First? How could any sane person talk about America First knowing what that stood for? America First started up with Charles Lindbergh, the first guy to fly across the Atlantic, blah, blah, blah. Great airman, okay? But he was a bigot to his heart. He's one of those people that felt that it was white people's duty to go to other people's lands and just take over and strip them of their natural resources. That's what America First meant. And that the problems that with the Jews and the problems they were having in Central Europe was none of America's business, and that we should just turn our backs and let Jewish people just be barbecued, and we're not going to say a word about it because we don't want to get Germany mad. That is America First. And to adopt that same title, right? I think that it's despicable. And just that whole thing alone, at this point in time, that is anti-Semitic. Oh, and the point I started to make earlier about the Republican base and their so-called love of Israel, these are the people here in America. It is your base Republican Party that is attacking Jews, right? Constantly catcalling George Soros. Yeah, look, believe me, the average Democrat, working class Democrat, has no idea who the hell George Soros is. Okay? As a matter of fact, maybe George should thank the Republican Party here in the United States, because you've made the man, believe me, you've made him famous. But see, that's the thing about the hypocrisy of this Republican Party. They're anti-Semitic, they're anti-Hispanic, they're anti-Asian, they're anti-Indigenous American. You know a person is against you when they don't want you to talk about your history. And see, this is more than just, oh, well, they don't want to talk about black history. And no, it ain't just black history. It's a part of the problem, but it's not the total picture. You don't talk about the American labor movement. Most Americans don't even know why we have an 8-hour day, how that came about. Only 2 people ever got bombed here in the United States by airplane, right? One was black folks in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The other, and almost around the same time period, right over here in West Virginia and Kentucky, against the striking mine workers. And the state government used pilots who had flown in the war, World War I, to drop bombs on American citizens. They bombed twice American citizens. They bombed them one time for being black, and the other time because these were white people fighting for justice for the working people. And I think that it's good if Americans learn that. and how we had gradations of whiteness, right? If you were Italian in 1895, you were not considered white. If you were Irish in America, excuse me, getting ready to wrap up here. But if you were Irish in 1865, 1870, 1880, you weren't considered white. Don't take my word for it. Go to the morgues of some of these big city newspapers, New York Times. Read the articles, New York Daily News. Read the articles from around that time period. We have been, as a nation, we have been just wrapped up in this whole race thing. And my God, let's not even Native Americans. We slaughtered those people in the 1870s, 1880s in the West. We slaughtered them. After we dragged them from the East Coast, we go out to the West. And what do? We decimate them. Same thing with Latin Americans. Southern Colorado, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California. All that was Mexico, pal. And we provoked the war so we had a way to steal it from those people. Now, who says that? Bobby Gums? Yeah, I do say that. But who else said that? How about a guy named Ulysses S. Grant and another great Republican, Abraham Lincoln? And both of these, Lincoln stood up against the war when he was in Congress. Grant said it was the worst thing that he ever did. That's how we got Texas. And I guess, I really want to upchuck when I hear, they're valiant fight for freedom. How could it be a fight for freedom? The Mexican government said, no, we don't have slavery in Mexico. That's verboten. No good. We don't have that here. And that was one of the main reasons, one of the top 3 reasons why the so-called Texicans revolted against the Mexican government. And I'm sure Santa Anna was no sweetheart, but you knew what the deal was when you ran away from the States, from that other family that you had back there, or them debts that you didn't want to pay, or from the folks that you probably murdered back in Tennessee or Kentucky. And you said, well, yeah, we can go out to Mexico. Have a great time. Get the land, blah, blah, blah. And then you're going to get the wind up because the Mexicans are saying, no, well, we don't own people here. We had enough of that with the Spaniards. And you got, and you get the nerve to get a case of the ass and decide that you want to rebel. Come on, man. This is America. This is our history. But if ever there can be a case made for people that were able to grow, right? America is it. It should be it. But we will not be able to grow as people or as a nation until we come face to face with who we were. I'm not saying that. I'm not going to, if I'm in the 6th grade, what am I going to do? I'm going to punch the kid next to me because he's white? And I'm teaching about slavery? Why don't you teach them about the Underground Railroad? Why don't you teach them, why do you not wish to teach them about the, I don't know how many hundreds and thousands of brave white people who fought and died to end slavery? I'm talking about before the Civil War. I'm talking about the Underground Railroad, prime example. Why don't you want your kids to learn about that? Why can't that little white boy in the 6th grade there or the 7th grade, why can't he learn one day, hey, I had a great granddad that ran an underground station in Ohio. Yeah. I think that would be something to be proud of. Why can't we celebrate the fact that this country is the only place that I can think of in world history that we know of that they fought a war to end human bondage? But you got to tell them about the bondage. What was the bondage? Well, you got to know what the bondage was before you take pride in having gotten rid of it. See, that's what is so screwy about right wingers. Okay? You have a lot of people, and I say this, and I realize what I'm saying is pretty heavy, but you got, to me, the Republican Party has basically become the fascist party or the seditionist party, because you listen to the things that come out of their mouth. They had their little debate last night, and you know what? We didn't learn a damn thing about what any of them clowns, with possible exception of Chris Christie. And what's my girl's name? The former South Carolina governor who was the representative to the UN, Nikki Haley. But other than that, wasn't nothing happening. What are you going to, what are your plans for the American people? And I keep hearing about Biden, the Biden crime family, and all this kind of. I don't see no court hearings, right? I do see that we have the lowest unemployment since 1969. I see infrastructure being built. I see people being put to work. Even in places where, in my opinion, they don't deserve it, because they always want to dump on Biden. And it seems that the more he tries to help those folks in red states, the more rocks they want to throw at him. Maybe because he happened to pick a black female vice president. I'm tired of trying to read the minds of people who live in a different planet than the rest of us. Okay? But yeah, what did they have for the American people? And what is it? Nobody's forcing Americans at gunpoint to shoot fentanyl. Stop blaming Mexico. Okay? Yeah, well, they're making us buy this crap. No. You're doing it. Find out what's wrong in this country that we don't want to face as to why, fentanyl is such a big seller. And do you know the funny thing about it? Most of your fentanyl people, your addicted people, are in those predominantly red states. Now, how about that? Wonder why. But it's something to think about. And I think that that's what we need to start doing in this country. We need to start thinking again. I really hope we do. I really hope we do. Listen, I know I usually go on my long tirade about Trump. I didn't do that tonight because, I've come to realize that it's not about Trump. It's about us. Trump is a symptom of a very sick disease. And we have to overcome that disease. Period. Folks, listen, I got to get to running here. Thank you for having me in your home. And God willing, we'll be here next week, same time, same channel. Take care of yourselves and each other. Peace.
held for processing at an overcrowded jail with a reputation for violence and neglect. A jail that is accustomed to holding defendants facing charges up to and including violent crimes, where stabbings are frequent. Actually, 3 people have lost their lives over the last month. That jail is where the disgraced ex-president of these United States is heading right now. This will make it 4 times in 5 months that the ex-president of the United States will walk in and out of a jailhouse to begin the process of answering for his alleged crimes. This one is a little different for a few reasons, including this. We are very likely to see a mugshot of Donald Trump sometime today or tomorrow. Mere hours ago, Trump replaced the lawyer who had previously led his defense in Georgia. You can make up your own mind whether that's a good or a bad sign for him. And what about his ex-chief of staff? Having failed in his bid to delay his own arrest, Mark Meadows surrendered himself, that's him up there on your screen, to authorities in Fulton County a short time ago. Remember, Meadows is still seeking to bump this trial up to the federal level, to take it out of District Attorney Fani Willis's hands, arguing that his alleged crimes were committed in his capacity as a federal official.
Welcome to Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Please.
Manhattan Neighborhood Network, this is Zach. How can I help you?
Yeah, hey Zach, could you come on and take this thing out for me?
Sure thing. I'll be right there.
Okay.
Now, that fight is the first real battle we expect in this case. It is set to commence next week in what's shaping into an early. Now, this will make it 4 times in 5 months that the ex-president of the United States will walk in and out of a jailhouse to begin the process of answering for his alleged crimes. This one is a little different, for reasons, including this. We are
Fairly good.
likely to see